Alright, it's been a while since we've done an iDraft interactive draft. For those new to the iDraft series, it's one in which there will be a pause. You guys can get to decide what pick you would make, and you can make liberal use of the pause button as well. And then at each pick, you'll be able to see how your picks compared with my opinion on what the best cards were. For those watching from the future, this is an arena done when Goblins versus Gnomes is the latest expansion, but Black Rock Mountain is not out yet. So Hunter is one of those unique arena classes. It's actually my worst one, but it just plays differently, and I think it has a lot more variance because the class cards aren't that strong and you want to draft aggressive, and sometimes people will be able to stop your aggression. Your hero ability doesn't control the board at all. It just kills them faster, which is something good and something bad. Let's get right into it. Alright, we start with a pretty tough pick right off the bat. It's going to be between Blood Knight and Recombobulator. Recombobulator is a 2-mana 3/2, which is already pretty good, but it comes with a pretty useful ability. You use that battle cry to target anything which has bad stats for its cost, or if it's already lost a lot of health and it's about to die and you recombobulate it for value. Blood Knight is very good value when you hit Divine Shields, but you don't always hit Divine Shields. In the Goblin versus Gnomes metagame, Paladin is pretty popular, Shielded Minibot is a really strong card, so Blood Knight is actually quite good. Hobgoblin is a terrible card. It's a 3-mana for a 2/3. You can't ever rely on comboing it, and though it is possible to build a Hobgoblin deck in Arena, it's just so unlikely that it's not even worth considering. So it's between Recombobulator and Blood Knight, of which I'm going to go with Recombobulator. Part of the reason is because, oh, one more thing. As a hunter, you're often looking out for 2-drops because your hero ability does nothing to control the board early. Goblins vs. Gnomes has made the metagame more offensive, such that, or more board control heavy. If you lose control of the board early, like by just skipping turn 2, you're at a heavy deficit. So a card like Recombobulator, picking up the 2-drops early is good. 3-drops aren't as good in Hunter because they have some really good 3-drops like Animal Companion and Kill Command and Eagle Hornbow. Tough pick, Recombobulator. This pick is also pretty close. It's going to be between Hunter's Mark and Fen Creeper. Tundra Rhino is a card which has poor stats. Perhaps if you already had picked up some good beasts, you might be more willing to pick it. Fen Creeper is a solid card. Never see it in Constructed, of course, because it's overshadowed by Sludge Belcher. But as it turns out, since the Goblins vs. Gnomes meta in Arena is a little bit faster, it can be helpful to get a big taunt up. Hunter's Mark is a little bit less good in this quicker Arena meta, because there aren't as many big things to hit. That said, though, I'm still going to pick Hunter's Mark because Fen Creeper isn't a great card, and Hunter's Mark is a really nice utility card, which I would always be happy in any deck to have one of. Which is also a little dangerous to pick it now because Hunter's Mark might come up later against a worse card, and I really don't want to have 2 Hunter's Marks. But I will pick the first one here. It's against Fen Creeper, which is an alright / good card, but not quite good enough. Easy pick here. Animal Companion is one of the best cards, very efficient no matter what beast you get. Stormwind Knight would be the second best card here. It's a slightly below average card, but in the dream situation, you play it and you kill the opponent's 3/2 and you still have a 2/2. Silverback Patriarch is complete trash because of the stats. In fact, sometimes you get a Silverback Patriarch with Animal Companion, which has 3 more attack, for free. One of the best cards in Hunter's arsenal, due to Goblins vs. Gnomes is here, Glaive Zuka, is the Fiery Windaxe of Hunter. I'd say nearly as good as Fiery Windaxe, not quite as good if you were to have to pick both of them, but it's nice that Hunter's actually got a Fiery Windaxe. Just a lot of value. You can possibly kill 2 guys with it, and then kill half a guy by buffing your guy as well. Ogre Brute is also a really strong card, and in Hunter especially, I like the aggressively priced stats. Timberwolf is too beast-centric, and I think there's not much point to building a beast-heavy deck. Maybe before Goblins vs. Gnomes and Naxxramas came out. The beast synergy just isn't there, unless it's something quite fantastic. Ogre Brute is a really good card, I will say that, and I would love to have picked it, but Glaive Zuka too strong. Easy pick here. It's going to be Earthen Ring Farseer. The Core Hound's stats are really poor. 5 health on 7 mana is ridiculous. And while we're talking about ridiculous stats, the Starving Buzzard stats are one of the worst prize stats for 5 mana of all time. Even if you were to build the best beast synergy deck, you wouldn't want to pick Starving Buzzard. Rip Buzzard. So earlier on in the intro, I said something along the lines of how hunters are aggressive and their hero ability doesn't control the face but just kills the opponent faster, which might have led you to believe that Zombie Chow would be a bad card in this deck. But Zombie Chow is actually the pick here. The reason being, board control is so important, and I think 1-drops have risen to a much higher level of importance in Goblins vs. Gnomes. You get that thing early on. Like I said, sometimes you miss your 2-drop and you lose, but a nice bonus is you play your 1-drop Zombie Chow, and you play a 2-drop, and then it's as if your opponent missed a 2-drop because your 1-drop trades with their 2-drop. The 5 health restore is the worst in Hunter. Zombie Chow is better in every single other class, but it's still a fantastic card. And I haven't drafted anything too ridiculously aggressive so far. So I will pick the Chow. Direwolf Alpha is the second best pick here. It's an alright card. It is a beast. There is some synergy there. Better card if you have an aggressive deck, which could be this deck. Tauren Warrior has really bad stats. Terrible pick. In fact, Zombie Chow is Tauren Warrior, except it costs 2 mana less, which is ridiculous when you think about it that way. Has a slight drawback, but whatever. 2 great cards here, and 1 loser card. Sen'jin Shieldmaster and Shroud Sun Cleric are both top cards. The Shroud Sun Cleric is a little bit better with the Zombie Chow synergy. It tends to be better with 2/3s, and if you control the board early with cards like Zombie Chow, you get the benefit more often. Sen'jin Shieldmaster is just a very strong overall card. Just off of general power level though, I'll pick the Sen'jin. There's also some slight consideration that I have no 4-drops yet, and I already have 2 3-drops. Cobra Shot is overcosted, and is weak as a result. Here we have Tracking versus 2 cards which are slightly weak. 2 mana 2/3 is a weak card. That one has a ability on it which makes it slightly better. So I think Stone Splinter Trog is like kind of an average card. Novice Engineer is a bit too slow and weak. Tracking is a card that I rate as slightly above average, in that it helps you find a better card. It does take a mana to do so though. And one of the big things that people are turned off to Tracking on is that you lose 2 of your cards when you track. And that is true, but in general you should be happy that you're losing those cards because you have selected 1 card over the other 2 cards. It makes it more likely that one of the cards you're throwing away is a card that was probably on the weaker side, and the card you picked up was on the stronger side. It's a good library sifting tool. Your deck sifting, I mean. When you play Hunter, the times where you get to fatigue are really, really small, so that you discard the other shouldn't even be thought of as a drawback, because it only matters when you fatigue. You should just think of those cards as having been on the bottom of your deck the whole time. Here we've got Cobra Shot, which again costs too much mana. Explosive Sheep is a card which I was confused on evaluating for some time. I've come to think that it's kind of weak if you have a minion-centric plan, because you just tend to hold in your hand and it's never quite good. You only really want to play the Explosive Sheep when you're behind. And Hunter is one of those classes where if you fall behind, you're probably not going to catch up. So I'm going to pick the Explosive Trap, even though I don't like Explosive Trap that much. It's certainly no 2-mana consecration, because your opponents will generally be able to test for the Explosive Trap first by trading off their minions and then activating Explosive Trap to hurt themselves for as little as possible. Explosive Trap actually often goes 0 for 1, as in, or 1 for 0 rather, as in you play the Explosive Trap and it doesn't even kill off anything on the opponent's side. But I will play it anyways. It's nice if I pick up a Mad Scientist later. It's the best card here. Easy pick here. The Knife Juggler is a really strong 2-mana 3/2, one of the strongest 2-mana 3/2s. It's up against the 2-mana 2/2, which is less good than the 2-mana 3/2. The ability on the Mana Wraith can't really be taken advantage of. Gadgetzan Auctioneer, you rarely have a deck in Arena which has that many spells. There's in fact only one deck in Constructed which even uses Gadgetzan Auctioneer sometimes, and that's in a Oil Rogue deck with so many spells in it. Poor stats, too much mana. Knife Juggler easy. Ooh, legendary. So, King Mukla is slightly better in Hunter, due to it being a beast, and due to the more aggressive nature of the deck. Gazlo is absolute garbage, because you can't really have 1-mana spells, although I get a tracking. No, it's bad stats. Gruul's a pretty good card, good late game. So it's kind of a call between whether or not you think this deck can run over your opponent quickly enough, or you just have the consistently big late game card. And taking King Mukla is, I would say, a risk, because if you do end up getting a late game-ish deck, then the King Mukla might backfire. Sometimes you draw the King Mukla late. Yes, King Mukla is absolutely amazing when you play it on turn 3, but past then, it could backfire badly. Gruul's just a very solid card, nearly always fine. Less good for the aggressive deck since you then have an 8-drop, but this isn't terribly aggressive so far. Just a standard Arena board control deck. Pretty easy Houndmaster here. And that is despite me only having one beast so far, the Animal Companion. Houndmaster is so much value when you manage to get it on a beast. 12 cards in, there will likely be beasts, even though I haven't picked any other than animals so far. The Razorven Hunter is a slightly below average card. It provides the 3-mana, 3/4 worth of stats in a pretty terrible way. And Dancing Swords is a very aggressive card. Probably Hunter is one of the best decks you could put it in, but it's just too risky due to the Death Rattle being severely having a lot of downside. It's a lot like Mukla, really. And in fact, if you picked a card like Mukla, a card like Dancing Swords would be a pretty good follow-up, and then you could have made a pretty aggressive deck. The Houndmaster is just a more standard, solid pick here for the board control-centric Arena deck, which is basically what everyone wants to do right now, even if you are Hunter. We've got another tracking, which, even though I have one tracking already, I still consider the second tracking to be a slightly above average card. Again, even if you have 2 trackings, possibly even if you have 3 trackings, you shouldn't fatigue with a deck in Hunter, in Arena. But we do have a card that's better than average here. Arcane Shot, nice removal. Can combo with the Hunter's Mark a little bit. It's a little bit painful, do a 2 for 1, but you can take out anything for just 1 mana. Thrallmar Farseer has really bad stats. It's no good. This pick is pretty clearly Deadly Shot. Due to the board control-centric nature of Arena, you often can control what random enemy minion gets destroyed. When you're even, or when you're ahead, you definitely can do it. You just get a lot of value out of the card. 3 mana destroy whatever you want is really powerful. Raging Worgen is, I'm going to say, an average card. It's tough to get the Wind Fury to happen. Sometimes it does activate and then you just win the game, so you have like sometimes you have that variance where sometimes Raging Worgen wins you the game, you think it's awesome, but other times it's just a 3 mana 3/3. Dancing Swords is again weakish. Alright, another tracking. We won't be taking that because there are 2 above average cards in here. If you've played Constructed, you know what a beast skill command is. But the bad news is we only have 1 beast, so this is actually currently a bad Dark Bomb, which by the way is still not that bad, 3 mana deal 3 damage. That said though, given that we only have 2 4-drops, and how good this engine is by default, it is still the pick. Basically, it's comparing stats of 4 mana 3/5 is better than the 3 mana deal 3. If I could consistently do 3 mana deal 5, I would pick the kill command over it. But this deck doesn't have enough skill to activate the skill command. There you go with Tazdingo instead. Alright, here we've got Web Spinner, which I consider to be a slightly above average card. I like 1-drops quite a lot when they aren't just 2 1s. When they do something. And Web Spinner is a card which doesn't lose you card advantage, which is important in a 1-drop, I find. Which is why all my 1-drops that I like aren't just things that you can Fire Blast away, or do 1 damage to, and then they don't give you any benefit. Tundra Rhino is too slow, especially since we've gone through half and we don't have any beasts, other than the Animal Companion, which sometimes charges anyways. The Cult Master is pretty good here because so far the curve is low. And Cult Masters like decks which curves are low on. So I'll pick that as the card drawing engine. We currently have no card drawing. Card drawing is pretty good. This pick's between Earthen Ring Farseer and Micro Machine. Frostwolf Warlord is too situational in that those situations where you can play it and it's huge, you've generally won anyways, because if you have minions on the board, you tend to be the one winning. So the choice is between Earthen Ring Farseer and Micro Machine here, and they're both close on power level. So here the important thing is to think about whether you need a 2-drop or a 3-drop. This deck currently has, early game play-wise, Zombie Chow, Glaive Zuka, Knife Juggler, Recombobulator. I'm going to count Explosive Trap and Tracking as half a piece, because they're cards that you can play, but maybe sometimes you don't, so you've got like 5. In Hunter, and in classes where the hero ability doesn't matter, I would be looking for something along the lines of, I'm going to say 7, 8 early game plays, and I want a few 3s also. Given we've got 5 halfway in, that's really close. And then I look at the Earthen Ring Farseer. Are there things which have a large enough amount of health to heal? In this case, we do have 2 Shield Masters, so that gets a little bit more value as well. Also, we already have 1 Earthen Ring Farseer, so a duplicate ability of that is slightly underwhelming. It's a very close call. This would normally be too close to call, but there are a number of things which make the Micro Machine just slightly better, I think. One, even though we're on track to get the correct number of early game cards, sometimes the final picks just don't give you any early game, And it's better to have too many early game than too few early game, I would say. Number 2, due to having another Earthen Ring Farseer, I say having variety in Arena deck is slightly better, due to, instead of having the decision of Earthen Ring Farseer or Earthen Ring Farseer, sometimes in a game you'll get that, you get to choose between Earthen Ring Farseer and a card which is of different mana cost, which is sometimes will make all the difference. Thirdly, the Micro Machine can possibly spin out of control, and we've got 2 Senjin Shieldmasters to taunt for it. It's a pretty close call. Those factors cause the Micro Machine to be just slightly better, I'd say. Raid Leader has really bad stats for the mana. Fen Creeper is alright, however, given that we've got 2 quality Senjin Shieldmasters already, it's actually a lot worse. You don't want that much taunt. A little bit is desirable. And then, when you already have 2 Senjins, the Fen Creeper gets outclassed. But really, the reason is Animal Companion is just ridiculously good, and you take it when you see it quite often. Though there are a number of neutrals which are better, which were introduced in Goblins vs. Gnomes. Spider Tank is a pretty tough competition for this card. Those 2 cards are pretty close. In this case, by the way, hypothetically, if there were a Spider Tank, I would still pick Animal Companion, because it has synergy with the Houndmaster. But it is normally close. This pick I had to think a little bit on, and then it became a bit clearer. I think having 2 Cult Masters isn't great. Perhaps if you had Unleash the Hounds, you might be more gravitated to pick something that combos with it, but 1's generally enough. Sometimes when you have 2, you just end up with a hand of 2 Cult Masters and you've lost the board, and you're like, oh, I have to play a 4 mana 4/2, that's terrible. Jungle Panthers got some extra synergy attached to it because there's the Houndmaster, and it's just a solid card by default. Mad Scientist has some benefits because there's an explosive trap. I think I would pick Mad Scientist over Jungle Panther if I had 2 traps in the deck, and I was thinking, if I pick the Mad Scientist, maybe in the next 10 picks I'll get another trap. And if I do, then Mad Scientist will have been a better pick. But instead I'm going to choose the more consistent Jungle Panther, which is already a good card, and you've got a Houndmaster. It's good. Take the sure thing. Well, in the last pick, if Scientist were to have been picked, I would have picked Snake Trap here. Scientist and 2 traps is pretty nice. Snake Trap is alright in Arena. Steam Weedle Sniper is quite good. Compared to Constructed, it's a slower format, so being able to actually control the board with your hero ability is amazing, especially if I get to place it behind my Senjin Shieldmasters. Junkbot is super trash. 5 mana, 1/5. No. I think if Snake Trap is about average, this deck actually has some slight synergy with it due to Knife Juggler, and Houndmaster, and Cult Master, but Steam Weedle just is better. Despite the extra synergy that Snake Trap has in this deck, it's still worse than Steam Weedle. But I would have happily picked up Snake Trap if such a good card hadn't been here. When it's late in the arena and a card with like some conditions such as Cogmaster comes up, I do a quick check. I've got Micro Machine, that's the only mech, so no, Cogmaster is terrible. Elven Archer is actually not too bad in Hunter, because it has no natural way to deal 1 damage. Elven Archer is handy in those decks. Oftentimes, opponents try to abuse those classes, which can't do 1 damage, by leaving things at 1 health. And then you pull out the Elven Archer, and pow! It also has value of Hunter's Mark. But Amani Berserker should be better here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 early game plays, and this kind of rounds it out. Elven Archer is even earlier than Amani. Although you often don't play this as an early game card, by the way. So after picking this, 2 drops, and 2 drops get a lot less valuable. Here we've got Gnomish Experimenter. Whenever I see Gnomish Experimenter, I do take a serious count on how many spells I have in the deck. That's Hunter's Mark, Arcane Shot, Tracking, Explosive Trap, Deadly Shot. Wow, 2 Animal Companions. That's 7. That's actually quite good. At first I thought I was just going to bypass it because I thought I didn't have that many spells in the deck, but Animal Companion sometimes surprises me with how many spells I have, because I always just consider Animal Companion to be a minion. It is. For the purposes of considering like how much spell-like stuff you have, Animal Companion is not really a spell. But when you're looking at a card like Gnomish Experimenter, which counts spells, that is a spell. And given that number of spells, I kind of like Gnomish Experimenter. A lot of people will look at it and it's like, wow, it's just going to turn my gruel into a chicken. And yes, that could happen. But those times where it happens, I like to, again, think, I encourage people to think of it more like tracking, where the card you draw, just assume it was a random card from the deck, because all the cards in your deck are random. It doesn't matter what's on the top. For that top card could have been on the bottom. So all you worry about really is the utility that sometimes you get the spell. 7 out of 30 in this deck so far. That's like 1 in 4. When you get a spell, that's insane value. 3 mana, 3/2, draw a card. And having, and I want to make this really clear also, having a chicken in your hand is really good. The random card you transform into the chicken turns out to be good. You'd rather have a chicken than have that card randomly in your deck somewhere, most of the time. It's just important not to fall too much in love with your cards. Kazan Mystic is a pretty good card. Current meta in Arena via Goblins and Gnomes is a lot of Mage, a lot of Paladin. Both Mage and Paladin often play secrets. And when you grab a secret, it's really strong. Alarma Bot sucks, 3 mana, 0/3. Given the number of spells I have in this deck, I will pick the Gnomish Experimenter. Also, I just felt the need to elaborate a bit more about this card because it has a bad rap. One slight side note also is the chicken has some slight synergy in the deck because of Knife Juggler, Cheap Knife, Houndmaster, it's a beast. Cult Master, you draw a card with it. But even without that synergy, I think it would still be better. Just because it has, the deck has a good amount of spells in it. 3 top tier cards here. I'm a little bit concerned since this deck has no late game, but with Goblins versus Gnomes' meta, it turns out that not having a late game isn't that big a deal. It's so much about early game, and you control the board early. Your mid game and your early game cards might be able to carry you. They do enough damage, they trade favorably against things. I would pick all 3 of these if I could. Beast count, I have 3 with Gnomish Experimenter, 4 with Jungle Panther. I already have a Houndmaster, so getting a second one, I don't think I really want another second one. Yeti's great, Spider Tank's great. Here, I will pick the Yeti over the tank because I have a lot of 3 drops already and not that many 4 drops. Normally, Fairy Dragon is a better card than Direwolf Alpha, mostly just because of the stats. 2 mana 3/2 versus 2 mana 2/2. One of them can be played independently, Fairy Dragon. The other one can also be played on turn 2, but sometimes it meets a bad fate when it's up against a 2/3. Direwolf Alpha is better in a deck where you have low mana cards, because then you'll have more minions on the board, you get more things to buff, you have a higher chance of controlling the board, and then being able to play it. So this deck happens to have all of the conditions which make Direwolf Alpha better than Fairy Dragon. Dragonly Mechanic costs too much and doesn't do enough. I'll pick the Direwolf Alpha. It's also Beast. This is a tough pick also. There have been a lot of tough picks in this arena. It's between Earthen Ring Farseer and Freezing Trap. The Mad Scientist earlier would have been quite good as it turns out, but again, I stand by not picking the Mad Scientist because it's random whether or not you get traps in the upcoming last 10 cards. Freezing Trap tends to be better in a faster deck because you might be able to kill them before they get their card advantage with Freezing Trap, because when you play the Freezing Trap, you are willingly giving up card advantage in order to get a tempo advantage. You lose a card, they return it to their hand, they can play it later, but sometimes they die too fast and they don't get to play the card. Freezing Trap's pretty good. It's really good with Mad Scientist. Earthen Ring Farseer has the slight downsides that it's a 3-drop and I have several, but has a slight upside that I have a lot of tough 4-drops, Yeti and 2 Senjins, which can be healed. Freezing Trap has the upside that this is an aggressive deck, and is the type where you want to kill the opponent because it's not going to win in the late game, given that I don't have any 5, 6s, or 7s. Another note is that Freezing Trap has synergy with Gnomish Experimenter. These small synergies do add up. Also, I already have an Earthen. Also, I have a lot of 3-drops. I'll pick the Freezing Trap. Also, here's what I'm going to do as well. I was going to do this first. Count the number of spells you have. I've got Hunter's Mark, Arcane Shot. I'm not going to count tracking. And when I say count up the number of spells you have, I think what I mean is count up the number of non-minion cards you can play to have an effect on the board. So Mark, Arcane Shot, Glaive Zuka, Explosive Trap. I count Steam Weedle Sniper as a spell. Deadly Shot. So it's basically 6. You want to have some amount, I'm going to say like 5+ of cards which aren't just minions, because often when you have a deck of just 30 minions, even if they are really efficient, you have a slow deck. It's just too one-dimensional. You want the option to sometimes play something that does something a bit different. For all the reasons said, I will pick Freezing Trap. It has everything going for it, other than the fact that I didn't pick Mad Scientist, of which I'm sad now, but still I don't regret the pick earlier. Alright, this one's between Houndmaster and Web Spinner. And the main criteria is just going to be seeing how many beasts I have. I've counted up the number of beasts I have so many times. It's 2 Animal Companion, it's the chicken, it's the panther. That's 4. Oh, and the Direwolf Alpha now. 5. Given that I think if I didn't have a Houndmaster already, I'd pick the Houndmaster. The Web Spinner pick makes the Houndmaster pick better. And the Web Spinner, this is pretty good. I will pick the Web Spinner. I don't think I have quite enough beasts to make the second Houndmaster that good. If I had more beasts, it would be a different story. Oh, Mad Scientist! Hype, 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 hype. That's a really good card. These 2 cards suck. This card is better than this card. There have been if I had picked all the trackings in this arena, I probably would actually go into Fatigue. 2 cards that are better than tracking here, though. Zombie Chow and Arcane Shot. This deck has ended up being one that's fairly aggressive, due to basically not being presented with anything that costs 5 or more other than Gruul. So I think Arcane Shot is possibly better than Zombie Chow here. It also has a synergy of Experimenter. So I'll pick the Arcane Shot. In a deck which had more late game, I'd probably pick Zombie Chow. For a card like Scavenging Hyena, you want to have Unleash the Hounds already picked before you pick that, I would say. Certainly not worth picking this in the last couple picks. I don't have enough beasts. It's like 6 beasts, which is alright, but otherwise it's 2 mana, 2/2. I don't need that early game. 2 mana, 1/4 is also not good enough. I'll pick the Mighty War Golem instead. Nice little bit of late game. I mean, it's not nice, but it's better than the other 2, and it's in the direction that I want it to be. And final pick. Kodo does have synergy of the Houndmaster. Matter Bomber is generally a good card, unless you have an aggressive deck, in which case Matter Bomber is actually a bad card. Matter Bomber is a card which varies a lot based on whether you have the more defensive deck or the later game deck. The more later game deck you have, the better Matter Bomber is because it's a catch-up card. When you play it from behind, it's really good. You never want to play it when you're ahead, so I think this card is quite bad here. Secret Keeper is terrible, though not that bad in this deck because of the 2 traps. It's still terrible, even in this case, but it's less bad than it usually is. Kodo is definitely the right pick here, though. Oh, and it's my first 5-drop, and it's a beast, and it's a really good card. So there we have it. I thought that was actually a really interesting arena. A lot of close calls. Ended up with something which is skewed in terms of has a lot of early game, not much late game, but that's okay in Goblins vs. Gnomes. It has a lot of quality cards in it. There are a few cards in here which are just straight up bad. In fact, I can't even really see any. In the early game, there's going to be 2 Arcane Shot, Web Spinner, Zombie Chow, Glaive Zuka, Berserker, Alpha, Juggler, Scientist, Micro Machine, Recombobulator, and Sniper, which is way more than I actually want, but again, like I said, somewhere in the halfway point. I would rather have too much early game than too little. I'm going to be able to run over opponents with this. In the case that I go second, it's more likely that I get to coin a 2-drop and then play a 2-drop, which is great. If I'm going first, the dream is to start off with Zombie Chow or Web Spinner, and then play Glaive Zuka, ideally, while the card is still alive. This deck will almost always have a 2-drop and then a 3-drop, so it'll always start off fine. A lot of good 4-drops to follow it up: Yeti, Shield Master. And then it falls off rather rapidly from there, so the consistency will be good. Extra synergy lies everywhere in this deck. You've got the Mad Scientist and the 2 traps. You've got the Experimenter and many spells. Hunter's Mark, Knife Juggler is a synergy. Deadly Shot kind of synergizes with the deck as a whole because of its aggression, so is Direwolf Alpha. Cult Master is really good in this deck since there's so much early game. The Taz Dingos are good because it defends the early game. That said, though, you can't really count on just early game carrying you. I would have preferred many times, instead of picking a 2-drop, to have the option of picking a later game card, such as Ogre, Spectral Knight, Silverhand Knight. Stranglethorn Tiger is a really good one. Just basically cards which cost 5+, which are good. But I'm pretty happy with this. I'm pretty happy, other than that it doesn't have late game. I think just 1, 2, or 3 late game cards replaced. Those cards replaced with 2-drops would have made this a lot stronger. Explosive Trap, by the way, actually turns out to be really awful in this deck because this deck is all about controlling the board early with minions, and sometimes the opponent's just going to have nothing on the board and your Explosive Trap will do nothing. Better in a control deck. So that's like the one card that's bad. Unfortunately, Hunter is one of my weaker classes. It's highly variable too. Like, your plan's pretty straightforward. You play your cards, you try to rush your opponent down. And sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. I myself prefer the illusion that if I have a few mid-late game cards which cost 5 or 6, I have a bit more control in the late game to like go the extra distance. And in fact, if I'd picked like a Savannah Highmane in this deck, I would have given this deck like maybe an additional win, or maybe even one more. But I'm going to guess a humble 8 wins.